I'm Susheel. I'm an MBA student at the University of Oxford. Started here last September. And prior to this, I was working as a consultant in the aviation industry. Did that for 6 years. Had the opportunity to work in both the US and then India. And I decided to join Oxford basically because I wanted to switch into more generalist consulting roles and explore other industries and functions, try to see if aviation is what I want to do long term, or if I want to experiment with other things. And outside of that, I'm an avid podcaster. I had my own podcast in the past, and that's something I'm also engaging with at the university currently. So the Future of Business podcast was an interesting one. Like I said, podcasting is something that I was doing in the past, and I came across this particular podcast when I was researching MBA programs. It was a good way to get an insight into different programs. So I tried to find podcasts that each of them had. And the Future of Business was the one that was run by the Oxford MBA program, more specifically the students. So the podcast's been around since 2017, and it took a bit of a hiatus during COVID when people were all remote. Didn't really happen that year. But last year's team actually revived it and brought it back and sort of got it operational to an extent where we managed to get a pretty significant listenership. And so when I was applying to the program, this was one of the things I really wanted to engage with. And so I reached out before the start of the program to the students from last year who were running the podcast, got a sense of what it's like, got a sense of what would be expected from me if I were to join it, and made it a point to really apply early for the podcast and try to let them know that I was really interested. There was an application process. There were, like, if I remember correctly, 20 to 25 people who applied. And then 6 of us ended up in the final podcast team. And it's been quite an experience. It's always nice to run something, especially something that operates within a place like the University of Oxford. It gives you a lot of perspective on things like the bureaucracy behind the whole process and trying to understand who your listeners are. So there's a lot of learnings there for me personally. But I think ever since I joined, it's been a really brilliant experience. With the guests, it's sort of like picking a favorite child, if you ask that of a parent. I've recorded 2 episodes so far, and I really enjoyed both of those guests and having that conversation with them. One was actually on social impact, and the other one was on the art industry and gender inequity within it. But the episode that I enjoyed this season was actually one recorded by another podcast host that's in our team. The episode's titled Trash Talk, and it's actually about waste management in Africa and how the person who was being interviewed has operated within that space. So that was a super fascinating episode, and I think it's been the highlight of the season so far. And the episode that's a personal favorite of mine is actually from last year. It's called Show Business, and it's about the media and entertainment industry and how that works. So these are some of my favorite episodes so far, but honestly, each and every one of them is really, really brilliant. And it gives you a perspective on the diverse backgrounds of Oxford MBA students. We're not just consultants, we're not just bankers, but each of us comes from such a unique place professionally. And being able to highlight that is a real joy as far as I'm concerned. They're all current students, and they're all people that we're friends with, people that we're in class with. And so it's always more engaging that way because you sort of have a lot of background on their profession because you've had conversations with them in detail about it. I think when the podcast started back in 2017, it was more tethered in conversations with alums, but we've moved away from that and focused more on our classmates. And the idea is to show the world what the class looks like and what their, like I said, diverse backgrounds are, and give a flavor for what the experience of the Oxford MBA would be like. Oxford, given the age of the university, it's steeped in tradition, right? And one of the things that is unique to the Oxford experience is the fact that you're not only part of the department, which is in our case the business school, but also college. And the college is sort of the hub for all of your social engagements, your sort of community within Oxford. And that's where you reside, that's where you eat and sleep. And those are typically the people you socialize with outside the MBA. One of the highlights of being in a college is the formal dinner. And it's essentially dressing up with your friends and going and eating really fancy food and drinking wine and having a fun time. But because this is Oxford, because it's an old school, there's a lot of traditions around that dinner. There's a high table and there's a lot of ceremony around the whole experience. And what makes it unique is that each college distinguishes itself from the others, either in terms of the quality of the food, the dining hall itself sometimes can be really scenic. For example, some of the Harry Potter movies were shot in the dining halls here. And so for a lot of people my age, that's a huge, that's really appealing. And finally, the food itself. I think that's something that varies from college to college, but some of them do it really well. And so the formal dinner is essentially a way for you to engage with folks from other parts of the university, because there'll be people visiting from other colleges to your formal dinners, and just have fascinating conversations with them about what they're working on, what they're studying. For example, I had a chat with someone who was an astrophysicist who was talking about how he's using machine learning models to try and map the universe. And I think those are things that you won't find at a traditional MBA program. And that's something that really sets Oxford apart. Typically, what you'll find is most people end up in jobs towards the end of the year, because that's typically when a lot of the unstructured hiring happens. It's rarer for structured hires, or rather, let me phrase it like this. A lot of the companies that do have structured hiring programs tend to close them early. And so the people who manage to get through that process typically know where they're going to be going. But for a bulk of the people, especially those who are looking to break into really niche spaces, or people who are entrepreneurs, to have to wait till the end of the year for them to really get into the job or get into the role that they like. And so in my case, I think something worked out. I was very fortunate. And so it's also put me in a situation where I don't have to worry as much about the professional aspect of the MBA. I can focus more on some of the other things that I spoke about, and that's something I'm looking forward to. So much of it is luck, down to the fact that you have to perform on the day of the interview, and you have to sort of hit all the right marks on the day of the interview. Networking was less critical in my case. It is for a lot of my classmates, just because, like I mentioned earlier, they are applying to unstructured roles. And so then it becomes a question of meeting the right people and finding the right opportunities. I think in my case, what I focused on since I started the program was being prepared for this interview phase, because I knew it would come up in January and February, and making sure that I'm able to put my best foot forward on the day of the actual interview. So that required a lot of practice. And thankfully, I did have great support from my classmates. There were some others who were also applying and also managed to get jobs. And so we were working together from the start to make sure that we were ready for this particular moment, and we were able to see the process through. But that being said, I think the good thing about Oxford Saïd is, if you're coming to the school to try and pursue one of the traditional industries like banking and consulting, those opportunities do exist for you. But I think the school does a great job of positioning you in a way that you could be an asset to any company you join, particularly given the ESG focus that's been at the center of the corporate world over the last few years. I think the school's a pioneer in that. And those sort of skills are always valued. And I think that's one of the things I was really able to highlight as I went through my interview process. Oxford has what would be called in a traditional business school a club. Oxford calls them Oxford Business Networks, or OBNs. And so there is a consulting OBN that Oxford has that I think there are almost 100, 120 people that are part of it. And then the leadership team, which is also a bunch of students, is 7 or 8 people. And so the idea there is that you work with the career services team to try and create opportunities for people to develop the skills they need to get these jobs, and also network with people within these industries so that you can actually figure out A, what the job entails, B, whether you want it, and C, what do you need to do to get there. And so in my case, how me and my friends approached it was we formed a small group of people that we do interview prep with. And we started back in, if I remember correctly, early November, and basically kept the practice going till Jan. So about, you want to say 3 months. And the idea behind it was to make sure that you get all the basics down so that when it's a couple of days away from the interview, you can basically focus on putting your best foot forward, making sure you're mentally there in terms of preparation. And so that's something that really helped. As far as the OBN overall goes, I think there are a lot of opportunities there for people looking not just in mainstream consulting, but also consulting that's fairly niche and unique. For example, given that Oxford is such a hub for environmental leadership, I think there's a focus on trying to bring most sustainability consulting firms onto campus. And so one of the objectives of the OBN this year is to actually hold a sustainability career fair, where we'll try to attract specialists in this field to come and interact not just with the MBA students, but also with some of the other programs that are here. And so the OBN is essentially trying to push the boundaries on what consulting means. Everyone knows of the big three. Everyone knows of, the other firms that exist in the space. But what we're trying to do is just highlight and provide opportunities to people who are looking to view consulting from a different perspective. And just to sort of bookend that thought, I think the same thing is happening across the other OBNs. So finance, social impact, climate, each of them is trying to push the boundaries on what a traditional career means. And I think if you're an incoming MBA student at Oxford, that's something that you should leverage to try and figure out what your next steps look like. I think a lot of people come in with a certain idea of what social life looks like in an MBA program and how they need to engage with it. And I remember that a lot of my classmates and me personally really struggled with figuring out what the right balance of going out and meeting 300 people versus finding your own sort of social circle and forming that stronger bond with them. And that problem is almost more acute in Oxford because it's a one-year program. And so you're sort of on the clock as far as each and every aspect of your life goes, but more importantly on this. And I'm sure it's even more challenging in a program that has like 600 people or 1,000 people. So my advice to people would be just engage with people that you're interested in, both from the perspective of forming a deeper relationship or from the perspective of professional growth. But really think about what you want from your classmates, what kind of relationships you want from them, and what kind of memories you want to form during your time at the MBA. And I think that's something that I particularly struggled with for the first few months. And that's something that I think I've reached a conclusion on more recently. So that's another piece of advice I have for someone who's joining an MBA program and thinking about these things.